The 11th of April, 1961, Jerusalem, Israel. Gideon Hauschner, the main prosecutor in the trial of a man charged with managing and facilitating the mass deportation of millions of Jews to ghettos and killing centers in the German-occupied East, begins his speech. When I stand before you here, judges of Israel, to lead this prosecution, I am not standing alone. With me are 6 million accusers, but they cannot rise to their feet and point an accusing finger towards him who sits in the dock and cry, "I accuse," for their ashes are piled up in the hills of Auschwitz and the fields of Treblinka, and are strewn in the forests of Poland. Their graves are scattered throughout the length and breadth of Europe. Their blood cries out, but their voices are not heard. Therefore I will be their spokesman, and in their name I will unfold the terrible indictment. The defendant in the dock, once a central figure in the implementation of the final solution, is Adolf Eichmann. Otto Adolf Eichmann was born on the 19th of March, 1906 in Solingen, then part of the German Empire, as the eldest of 5 children. In 1914, the family moved to Linz in Austria after Adolf's father had taken a position as a commercial manager for the Linz Tramway and Electrical Company. After the death of Adolf's mother, Maria, in 1916, his father married a woman who brought 2 more sons into the marriage. In Linz, Eichmann, a poor student, attended the same high school that Adolf Hitler had attended 17 years earlier. Because of his poor school performance, his father withdrew him from school and Adolf began training in mechanical engineering. However, even though all his siblings finished their studies, Adolf left without attaining a degree. In the uncertain economic times of the 1920s, he drifted from job to job as a day laborer, an office worker, and as a traveling salesman for a vacuum oil company, AG. In 1932, at the instigation of Ernst Kaltenbrunner, whom he had met during his school days, Eichmann entered the Austrian National Socialist Nazi Party and the SS. Eichmann pursued party activities in Linz on the weekends, while continuing his position at Vacuum Oil in Salzburg. A few months after the Nazi seizure of power in Germany in January 1933, Eichmann lost his job due to staffing cutbacks at Vacuum Oil. The Nazi Party was banned in Austria around the same time. Like many Austrian Nazis, Adolf Eichmann fled Austria for Bavaria, where in August 1933 he joined the Austrian Legion, an association organized for Nazi Party members from Austria. There, he engaged in a few months of military training, part of which took place at Dachau. In 1934, Eichmann joined the SD, which was the intelligence agency of the SS, and the Nazi Party in Nazi Germany, and was considered a sister organization of the Gestapo. From November 1945, Eichmann worked for Section 2, 112 of the SD, and his task was to study and prepare reports on the Zionist movement and various Jewish organizations. He even learned a smattering of Hebrew and Yiddish, gaining a reputation as a specialist in Zionist and Jewish matters. On the 21st of March 1935, he married Vera Liebel, and the marriage produced 4 sons. In January 1937, Eichmann presented a memorandum on the Jewish question, in which he declared Judaism to be an eternal enemy of National Socialism. He also claimed that the necessary de-Judization of Germany could only be conducted through pogroms, anti-Jewish riots, and Aryanization. This transfer of Jewish-owned businesses to German ownership throughout Germany and German-occupied countries included 2 stages. The first stage, voluntary Aryanization, lasted from 1933 until the summer of 1938. During this phase, the combination of Nazi terror, propaganda, boycotts, and legislation was so effective that some 2/3 of these Jewish-owned enterprises were out of business or sold to non-Jews. Jewish owners, often desperate to emigrate or to sell a failing business, accepted a selling price that was only 20 or 30% of the actual value of each business. The second stage, forced Aryanization, lasted from the fall of 1938 until the collapse of the Nazi regime in 1945, and during this phase all Jewish-owned businesses and property were forcibly confiscated by the Nazis. Eichmann claimed that it was important to promote emigration to areas where the Jews cannot harm the Reich, meaning to countries that do not have a high level of culture and where they can only survive through hard work. He saw some states in South America and Palestine as such countries and recommended a central office to promote Jewish immigration to these areas. In 1937, he even traveled to Palestine, where he visited Haifa and hiked through Mount Carmel. Violence and economic pressure used by the Nazis to encourage Jews to leave Germany proved effective, and around 250,000 of the country's 437,000 Jews emigrated between 1933 and 1939 of their own volition. During the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria, in March 1938, Eichmann personally led a raid on the Jewish cultural community offices. He then worked to organize a Central Office for Jewish Emigration in Vienna, which opened officially on the 20th of August 1938. According to internal estimates, the Central Office facilitated the emigration of 110,000 Austrian Jews between August 1938 and June 1939, and was so successful in its forced emigration efforts that it created a template often called the Vienna Model, or a Reich-wide Reich Central Office for Jewish Emigration. In the summer of 1939, Eichmann became responsible for promoting the expulsion of Czech Jews from the newly annexed protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, and created a further Central Office for Jewish Emigration in Prague, following the pattern of its Viennese counterpart. However, the Viennese successes could no longer be repeated in this form, partly because fewer and fewer states were willing to take in the refugees, and because of the beginning of the war, which started on the 1st of September 1939 with the invasion of Poland. After, in October the same year, Adolf Eichmann was transferred to Berlin to command the Reich Central Office for Jewish Emigration for the entire Reich. He organized the first actual attempt at mass deportation from the Greater German Reich. He coordinated the deportation of some 3,500 Jews from Moravia and Vienna to Nisko transit camp, where Jews would be temporarily housed before being deported elsewhere. Although problems with the deportation effort and a change in German policy, which needed trains for military purposes, put an end to these deportations, Eichmann's superiors were sufficiently satisfied with his initiative to ensure that he would play a role in future deportation proceedings. On the 19th of December 1939, Adolf Eichmann was assigned to head Reich Security Main Office Subdepartment 4D4, which was tasked with overseeing Jewish affairs and evacuation. Reinhard Heydrich announced Eichmann to be his special expert in charge of arranging all deportations into occupied Poland. The job entailed coordinating with the police agencies for the physical removal of the Jews, dealing with their confiscated property, and arranging financing and transport. Within a few days of his appointment, Eichmann formulated a plan to deport 600,000 Jews into the general government, which was the German-occupied part of Poland. The plan was stymied by Hans Frank, Governor-General of the occupied territories, who was disinclined to accept the deportees, as to do so would have a negative impact on the economic development and his ultimate goal of Germanization of the region. From the start of the war until April 1941, around 63,000 Jews were transported into the general government. On many of the trains in this period, up to a third of the deportees died in transit. In the autumn of 1941, Eichmann took part in discussions in which the annihilation of the European Jews was planned. Since Eichmann was to be in charge of transporting Jews from all over Europe to the killing centers, Reinhard Heydrich asked Eichmann to prepare a presentation for the Wannsee Conference. On the 20th of January 1942, 15 high-ranking Nazi Party and German government officials gathered at a villa in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee to discuss and coordinate the implementation of what they called the final solution of the Jewish question. The final solution was the code name for the systematic, deliberate, and physical annihilation of the European Jews. At some still undetermined time in 1941, Adolf Hitler authorized the European-wide scheme for mass murder. Heydrich convened the conference to inform and secure the support of government ministries and other interested agencies relevant to the implementation of the final solution, and to disclose to the participants that Hitler had tasked Heydrich and the Reich Security Main Office with coordinating the operation. At the time of the Wannsee Conference, most participants were already aware that the Nazi regime had engaged in mass murder of Jews and other civilians in the German-occupied areas of the Soviet Union and in Serbia, and none of the officials present at the meeting objected to the final solution policy that Heydrich announced. Instead, they discussed the implementation of a policy, as the mass murder of Jews by Nazi Germany and its collaborators required the coordination and cooperation of governmental agencies throughout Axis-controlled Europe. Heydrich indicated that approximately 11 million Jews in Europe would fall under the provisions of the final solution. In this figure, he included not only Jews residing in Axis-controlled Europe, but also the Jewish populations of the United Kingdom and the neutral nations such as Switzerland, Ireland, Sweden, Spain, Portugal, and European Turkey. For the Jews residing in the Greater German Reich and holding the status of subjects of the German Reich, the Nuremberg laws would serve as a basis for determining who was a Jew. Adolf Eichmann attended the conference, oversaw the stenographer who took the minutes, and prepared the official distributed record of the meeting. In his covering letter, Heydrich specified that Eichmann would act as his liaison with the departments involved. Under Eichmann's supervision, large-scale deportations began almost immediately to extermination camps at Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka and elsewhere. Eichmann did not make policy, but acted in an operational capacity. Eichmann's office was responsible for collecting information on the Jews in each area, organizing the seizure of their property, and arranging for and scheduling trains. He made sure that the timetables were adhered to, and that the trains that transported people to the ghettos and concentration camps were put together and used to full capacity. He was thus directly responsible for the expropriation, deportation, and murder of around 6 million Jews, and belonged among the major organizers of the Holocaust. Eichmann held regular meetings in his Berlin offices, with his department members working in the field, and traveled extensively to visit concentration camps and ghettos. Eichmann is said to have visited all major death camps and observed murders to gain an overview of the industrial extermination of people in order to be able to rationalize the method and logistics of the extermination from his desk. The Holocaust survivor, Zvi Cohen, recalled how on one such visit to the Theresienstadt ghetto, located in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, his mother stood in the way of Adolf Eichmann when he was inspecting the ghetto. Eichmann screamed at her, "Jew, get out of my way," and kicked her in the buttocks with all his strength. In 1942, Eichmann and his henchmen organized the deportation of Jews from Slovakia, the Netherlands, France, and Belgium. In 1943 and 1944 came the turn of the Jews of Greece, northern Italy, and Hungary. Only in Hungary did Eichmann involve himself directly on the ground in the deportation process. Hungarian units suffered tremendous losses during the German defeat at Stalingrad on the Eastern Front in 1942 and 1943, and after the defeat, Hungarian Admiral Miklos Horthy and Prime Minister Miklos Kolai recognized that Germany would likely lose the war, and they tried to negotiate a separate armistice for Hungary with the Western Allies. To prevent these efforts, German forces invaded Hungary on the 19th of March, 1944. Eichmann arrived in Hungary the same day and was soon joined by top members of his staff and 500 or 600 members of the SD, SS, and SIPO, National Security Police. Hitler's appointment of a Hungarian government more amenable to the Nazis meant that the Hungarian Jews, who had remained essentially unharmed until that point, would now be deported to Auschwitz concentration camp to serve as forced labor or to be gassed. Eichmann toured northeastern Hungary in the last week of April and visited Auschwitz in May 1944 to assess the preparations. Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, later testified that Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, had told him to receive all operational instructions for the implementation of the final solution from Eichmann. In mid-May the same year, the Hungarian authorities, in coordination with the German security police, began to systematically deport the Hungarian Jews. SS Colonel Adolf Eichmann was chief of the team of deportation experts that worked with the Hungarian authorities. The Hungarian police carried out the roundups and forced the Jews onto deportation trains. In less than 2 months, from the 15th of May to the 9th of July, 1944, nearly 440,000 Jews were deported from Hungary in more than 145 trains. Most were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where upon arrival, and after selection on a rail ramp, about 80% of the deportees were gassed on arrival. Because the crematoria were unable to cope with the number of corpses, firing pits were dug where bodies were burnt. In light of the worsening military situation and facing threats from Allied leaders of war crime trials, Horthy ordered a halt to the deportations on the 7th of July, 1944, and by the time they had stopped 2 days later, almost the entire community of Jews in the Hungarian countryside had died. By the end of July, 1944, the only Jewish community left in Hungary was that of Budapest, the capital. On the 15th of October the same year, the Germans arrested Horthy and installed a new Hungarian government under Ferenc Szálasi, the leader of the fascist and radically anti-Semitic Arrow Cross Party. During the Szálasi regime, Arrow Cross gangs perpetrated a reign of arbitrary terror against the Jews of Budapest. Hundreds of Jews, both men and women, were violently murdered. Many others died from the brutal conditions of forced labor to which the Arrow Cross subjected them. Throughout November and December 1944, Eichmann arranged for tens of thousands of Jewish victims to be forced to march in appalling conditions from Budapest to Vienna, a distance of 210 kilometers. Many, who were too weak to continue marching in the bitter cold, were shot along the way. Some 255,000 Jews, less than one-third of those who had lived within enlarged Hungary in March 1944, survived the Holocaust. In December 1944, before Eichmann could complete the deportation of the Jews of Budapest, and a few days before the Hungarian capital fell to the Red Army, he hastily decamped back to Germany. Eichmann was soon after apprehended by the Americans and caught masquerading under the false name Otto Eckmann. After fleeing the American detention camp in January 1946, he hid out on a farm for a few months, going on to live in the British-occupied zone under the borrowed identity of Otto Henninger. Along with many Nazi criminals in 1950, he was granted a Catholic Church certificate of indulgence, which enabled him to sail clandestinely from Italy to Argentina under the false identity of Ricardo Klement. At this time, Argentina had become a safe haven for thousands of Nazi criminals who arrived by what was known as the Rat Route. Going under his false name, Eichmann was employed at a Mercedes-Benz workshop. In 1952, his wife and children joined him. Eichmann's significant role as one of the architects of the final solution of Europe's Jews began to emerge in the late 40s. From the early 50s, rumors proliferated, claiming that he was in South America, as the intelligence services of Western Germany and the United States had already learned with certainty. But it was thanks to the determination and persistence of a number of individuals resolved to expose the true identity of Ricardo Klement that agents of Israel's Mossad launched a hunt ending with Eichmann's capture on the 11th of May, 1960. After seizing Eichmann close to his Garibaldi Street home in a suburb of Buenos Aires, his captors rushed him to a place of concealment. Under interrogation, Eichmann admitted his true identity and signed a document giving his consent to stand trial in Israel. 11 days later, he was clandestinely flown to Israel. 2 days after Eichmann's arrival, on the 23rd of May, 1960, the Prime Minister proclaimed that Eichmann had been captured and was in Israel. The news stunned and amazed public opinion in Israel and worldwide. The security measures were enormous because the Israeli government feared that Eichmann would commit suicide. Eichmann's cell was 3 by 4 meters in size. A guard sat in his cell around the clock, and behind the cell door, a second watched his colleague through a peephole. Another guard stood behind the exit door. Lights were on in the cell day and night, and a police doctor examined Eichmann twice a day. The trial, which attracted the attention of the public worldwide, began on the 11th of April, 1961, in Jerusalem. Hundreds of journalists came to Israel from every part of the world to cover the trial. A list of 108 surviving witnesses was prepared, as well as another of expert witnesses, historians, and other scholars. 1,600 documents were selected, most of them bearing Eichmann's signature. The indictment charged Eichmann on 15 counts, including crimes against the Jewish people and crimes against humanity. The defense did not contest the facts included in the indictment, opting instead to play down the responsibility of the accused for the crimes of the Nazi regime against the Jews. Eichmann did not deny the Holocaust or his role in organizing it, but said he was simply following orders in a totalitarian Führerprinzip system. The defense depicted the accused as a small cog in the state apparatus, lacking influence upon the planning and operation of the murder machine. The judges noted the determination of Adolf Eichmann to continue at all costs the deportation of Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz, especially towards the end of 1944, on the verge of the collapse of the Third Reich, even in opposition to the views of his superiors. Throughout his cross-examination, prosecutor Hauschner attempted to get Eichmann to admit he was personally guilty, but no such confession was forthcoming. Eichmann admitted to not liking the Jews and viewing them as adversaries, but stated that he never thought that their annihilation was justified. When Hauschner produced evidence that Eichmann had stated in 1945 that, "I will leap into my grave laughing because the feeling that I have 5 million human beings on my conscience is for me a source of extraordinary satisfaction," Eichmann said he meant enemies of the Reich, such as the Soviets. However, during later examination by the judges, he admitted that he had meant the Jews and said that the remark was an accurate reflection of his opinion at the time. The trial terminated on the 15th of December, 1961, with a reading of the verdict, whereby Eichmann, found guilty on most of the articles of the indictment, was sentenced to death. He was 56 years old when he was executed by hanging at the Ramla prison during the night between the 31st of May and the 1st of June, 1962. In his final moments, Eichmann expressed his unwavering love and loyalty to Germany and Argentina. After his body was incinerated, his ashes were scattered at sea outside Israeli territorial waters. The trial revolutionized the status and importance of Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center, as the institution that provided the groundwork of research for the team preparing the trial. The Eichmann trial broke down the reluctance of many Israelis and Jews to approach the Holocaust due to the powerful impression left by the personal testimonies of over 100 witnesses who were called upon to recount their experiences during the Holocaust. Echoes of the trial finally attracted attention and awareness to the Holocaust survivors, who had hesitated prior to the trial to tell their personal stories, owing to a reluctance and absence of openness among many native-born Israelis. There were no tears shed for Adolf Eichmann. Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.